Um, well, great. Well, again, my name is Megan. I'm calling today from Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And today we're going to be talking about SIT program opportunities. So those are going to be graduate programs as well as some undergraduate programs as well. And then joining me on the call today from SIT is Dr. Bruce Dayton, who is a program chair for a couple of our graduate programs, as well as the director for a certificate program that is conflict across cultures, or a contact program. So he's going to be here talking about crisis leadership and going to lead us on a discussion and really provide some great information and some different theories and thoughts around crisis leadership, especially in this time right now of COVID-19. And there will be time for a Q&A after Bruce's discussion, as well as another time for Q&A at the end of my introduction, or excuse me, the overview of the programs at the end of the session. So if you can just hold on to those questions until those times, that'd be great. So here's just a brief agenda of how the session is going to flow today. So we went through the welcome. I'm going to do a brief introduction to SIT, or the School for International Training. Apologies for using that acronym without defining what that stands for. Bruce is then going to be talking about leadership during times of crisis. And then there's going to be program overview that I'll be going through, application and admissions information, the scholarship, like Laura mentioned, I'll be running through kind of what those scholarships are. And then we'll have time for additional Q&A at the very end. Great. So just a brief introduction to SIT for those of you on the call that might not be familiar with who we are. So SIT is the School for International Training, and we got our start, it's a pretty unique history that we have that got our start with the Peace Corps, the United States Peace Corps. And before that, even though, there was a program called the Experiment for International Living, which was a high school exchange program that had its base, kind of started in New York, and then it made its way to Vermont. And it was one of the first exchange programs back in the early 30s that really was an opportunity for high school students to get their opportunity to go from one country to another and really have that opportunity to learn about intercultural exchange, intercultural communication, and just the importance of intercultural and international exchange programs. And one of those first experimenters, as we call them, was someone named Sergeant Shriver, who went on to play a vital role with the start of the Peace Corps. And when the Peace Corps got its start, John F. Kennedy, who was the president at the time, who was tasked with to start the Peace Corps, he called on Sergeant Shriver and the experience that Sergeant Shriver had, and together they decided that let's use this incredible space and this incredible program model that the Experiment in International Living was, to really start something called the Peace Corps and use the knowledge and the expertise that many of the trainers that were there for the experiment were able to then go on to use with the Peace Corps. And at the Peace Corps, they had the chance to talk about intercultural exchange, the training, the language training. And so really SIT got our start as kind of a language center in a sense. We were one of the first to really train the Peace Corps volunteers on language training, on intercultural training, intercultural communication, cross-cultural skills. All those skills that I know that many of you learn as well when you're at Camp Rising Sun, and that is still very much a part of who we are today. The Peace Corps evolved into many different iterations from there, and many of the trainings happen now in country. So at SIT, we had these amazing language instructors and amazing intercultural trainers, and we then from there got our start as a graduate institute, and evolved into doing some undergraduate programming, some certificate programs, and the Graduate Institute today has taken a different shape and a different form than when we first started, but at the core is still that social justice and experiential learning model that I'll talk a little bit about more later on in this presentation. But as I mentioned, we have study abroad and graduate programs, so undergraduate study abroad and then graduate level master's programs at the Graduate Institute. And really what all of our programs are really hoping for and striving for is to be able to offer programs that are providing you with a good foundation and a great base of understanding what it means to work as a social justice educator, someone who really has a passion and interest in making the world a better place and tackling some of the biggest social justice issues or critical issues of our time. And ultimately leading and preparing you to become a better leader and a better global citizen in our world. So on the topic of leadership, I do want to just kind of quickly, with the interest of time, jump over to introducing Bruce Dayton, who will be talking about leadership during times of crisis. So as I mentioned, Bruce is the program chair for our Peace and Justice Leadership Master's Program, as well as our Diplomacy and International Relations Master's Program as well. And he also plays a vital role in the Graduate Institute with many different program planning and program development. So he's always got the wheels turning with different ideas. And I'm really excited to be able to not only present him to you, but also to sit in on this conversation around leadership during times of crisis. So Bruce, I will pass the mic over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Megan, and thanks, Laura, for inviting me. So Megan asked me to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes on something to do with leadership, and I was thinking, well, what would be interesting? And I thought I would take the short amount of time to talk about one of my favorite topics, something that I teach a class on, and something that just seems so relevant because we're all going through this novel, unbelievably strange period of time with COVID-19 that's affecting every country in different ways. And if you're a leader, you can't get away from it. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. And I have two goals in my short amount of time. The first is to give you an analytical lens that you might be able to use as you watch this crisis continue to unfold in your countries and your communities. There is an analytical lens we use and I use for my class. By the way, we're also offering a certificate in crisis management this summer. So everything I'm talking about today is useful for me because I'm thinking about how to put that together. So that's my first goal, is an analytical lens. And the second goal is to have you explore in your own minds whether this might be a field you're interested in going into. This is a huge, new, exploding field, crisis management. And whether it's a private organization, government, community level, state level, national level, international, crisis management is increasingly a skill set that many organizations are looking to hire in, and lots of schools are doing training. So next slide. So what's the crisis landscape and what's different, and why is this field so hot right now, crisis management and leadership? There's kind of 5 reasons I think of. The first is most of the people who are researching this field now are making the claim that crises are getting more severe and more numerous. And you could say, well, how could that be? The history of human society is a history of crises. What's new? But really what's new is in modern societies, the way we create modern societies is we're creating systems and processes that are, the language is highly intercoupled. So every one part is connected to and dependent on the other parts. And so if there's a failure in one node, it has what's called a cascading effect and causes failures in other nodes. You can just think of a simple analogy of dominoes, right? When you when you knock down one domino, it starts a chain reaction. And back in the old days, we had systems and processes that were local and not connected. So one domino would fall, but it would be one domino. But if you take banking systems, the electrical grid, healthcare systems, you name it, globalization has meant increasingly what we create is interconnected. So crises are getting more severe because of this interconnection and this cascading effect. The second reason I think that explains why this is such a hot field is that if you're interested in conflict like me and societal change, look at a crisis and you're going to find a trigger for political change. And there's nothing like a well-managed crisis to cement faith in governance and leadership. And there's nothing like a poorly managed crisis to really undermine public confidence in governance and usher in sometimes huge revolutionary changes. Third reason is if you want to be a leader, most leaders are interested in crisis management training because leaders are defined by what they do and how they behave in crisis situations. And for all the crises that I've studied, they make or break political careers. A well-managed crisis elevates as heroes some of our political leaders and has the opposite effect if they're poorly managed. You could also argue that it's hot because there's a lot of money in it. If in the United States now, since 9/11, which is the first big modern crisis that caused an explosion of the field in the United States, we have 9/11, we had Hurricane Katrina, we had Hurricane Sandy, we had SARS, we had the Ebola outbreak, now we have COVID, a whole series of crises. And managing those is now at the federal level in the US, something called the Department of Homeland Security. It's got a budget of $98 billion a year. And they're throwing all that money into helping systems and communities get better ready for crises of all types: natural disasters, terrorism, political crises, financial crises, health crises. And then the last thing to comment on is that I think a lot of people who do training and leadership and develop young people in their fields have realized that we don't do a lot of training in crisis management. We train people for normal day-to-day problem solving, how to be a normally good manager. But the argument that I always take when I do training is that crisis management leadership is different, has a different set of challenges than any other kind of leadership you'll practice, and it requires a specific kind of training. So next slide. So this is the question that I want you to think of, and you can put in any leader for Donald Trump here. They're all dealing with crises now. And the question is, if you're a leader and you're going through a crisis, how is that different? Next slide. Okay, so think about a crisis in your head, COVID or something else, or maybe you've been involved in a local crisis. And my question for you is, what makes crises different? How are they different from day-to-day challenges that leaders face? And what I want to bring to your attention is that in the field, we consider that all crises have three things in common. For something to be a crisis, three things are going on simultaneously. Next slide. So the first is that all crises represent a fundamental threat to values. So crisis situations threaten the core values that an organization or a group believe is essential to its identity or its survival. And notice that I underlined well, I didn't underline it, but it says values, plural, meaning that almost every crisis, there's multiple conflicting values that are at play that make navigating it as a leader really difficult. If you think of COVID-19, what are the two big values that are causing difficulty in management? It's pretty obvious. You have economic health and growth on one hand as one set of core values, and you have personal health as another set of values. And those two values are really intersecting and making it difficult for leaders to decide how to navigate things. And when there's a big threat to values, what's different for leadership and decision-making is everybody's paying attention. The entire public is paying attention to what's going on, unlike your normal decision-making moments. So there's a real strong pressure to act, and everyone's mobilizing to try to get you to do something. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so first thing all crises have in common, high threat. Second thing, urgency, a short amount of time. Crisis situations have a finite time in which decision makers and leaders can act. We think of that as a window of opportunity. Think about an earthquake, for instance. If somebody is trapped in a building after an earthquake, do you know how long they can survive without water before they die? 3 days. And that's why after an earthquake, there's this tragic moment that that decision-making ceases to revolve around search and rescue, saving people who are trapped, and it goes into a mode called recovery. And that's because the assumption is everybody who's still in the building has died. That's urgency. That's a short amount of time to act. And every crisis has a slightly different amount of time to act, but they're all characterized by a sense of urgency. Okay, next. So how does urgency affect decision makers if you're leaders? Well, it does it in a couple ways. I'll talk about what's on this slide in a second, but I want you to think about two other things that I see in the cases I look at. That what happens when you're facing an urgent situation that's really threatening. Just think about experiences in your life where that has been something you're dealing with. Well, one thing that happens is what's called the stress performance curve, meaning that the higher the level of stress, after a certain point, there's a rapid deterioration of performance. So you've got stress on the bottom, you have performance on the side. And it turns out that a certain amount of stress is really good for performance. So if I wasn't a little bit stressed about talking to you today, I'd be terrible. I'd talk like this. Hi, thank you for coming. It's the stress that allows me to be energized because I'm worried about it. And good managers and leaders know how to work with stress. Put employees and people under a little stress and they'll perform at a higher level. But after a certain amount of stress, performance rapidly deteriorates. And that's what we see usually with leaders in crisis situations, because they're up for multiple days. They have incredible pressures they're facing. They need to make a decision. And their decision-making is really clouded by increased amount of stress. We also see a couple other things with urgency. One is a contraction of authority. So systems, you might be normally solving a problem in your organization, but when a crisis happens, leaders are so worried about it above you that they almost swoop in and they take over management of the crisis. We're seeing that in the United States. President Trump now is our leader for crisis management. Is he the most suited for leading us through COVID-19? No, he certainly isn't. But because of contraction of authority, higher up level leaders assume command of crisis situations. Next slide. And then the third dynamic that is present in all crises is a high amount of uncertainty. So in crisis situations, leaders who have to act, they face an incomplete understanding of what's happening, why is it happening, and if I take this action, what impact will it have? That is uncertainty. So we call that an information poor environment. So if you think about normal leadership, the good thing about normal leadership is if you don't know something, if there's uncertainty, you put together a committee to study it, or you take time, or you read the report. There's no, because of time limitations, you can't reduce uncertainty. So in an information poor environment, what we see with leaders who manage crises is they are often coming up with assumptions about what's happening and defining the problem in ways that turn out to be incorrect. Because how you define a problem determines what you do about it. If you define something as a war on terrorism, for example, you address terrorism as if it's a war. So how you define problems determines how you approach them. That's called path dependency. Next slide. So think about, in this notion of uncertainty, think about leaders is really what they're doing. They're helping us make sense of what's happening, because the public has no idea what's happening here. Why is it happening to us? Explain it. And so there's the event, the crisis, there's the act, what leaders are doing, but the critical dimension in the middle is how are leaders interpreting what's happening? So helping leaders interpret clearly and eliminate cognitive biases, they're getting mixed up and clouded in how they see the reality of the situation becomes really important in training. Next slide. So here's an example of that. How many legs does this animal have? Well, some of you may say 4 because you may be seeing a rabbit. Some of you may say 2 because you're seeing a duck. This is one of those tricky pictures that has 2 images in one. You can see it either as a duck or a rabbit. And some people, if you've never seen this before, maybe you've had, but some people, when they first see it, they immediately see the rabbit. Some people immediately see the duck. I want you to think about crisis leadership in some ways as making that definition as doing that sense making, at deciding what is it we're facing in uncertainty, urgency, and high threat. Next slide. So let's put it together. What is a crisis then? It's a situation presenting a basic threat to the fundamental values and norms of a system that under time pressure and highly uncertain circumstances necessitates making a vital decision. Can you imagine, as a leader, a worse situation to be in? Next slide. It's a perfect storm for poor leadership decision-making. This is adapted by a really well-known researcher that was active a long time ago, kind of started the field, who calls this the crisis cube. And it's just a way to picture decision-making if you're a leader. Most of the time, if you see this as a cube, the issues you're dealing with have low threat, good amount of time to decide what to do, and not a lot of uncertainty, or at least uncertainty that you can mitigate. But a crisis situation is the perfect storm for challenging decision-making for leaders because we have high threat, short time, and high uncertainty all combined. And that really messes with your ability to make good decisions. Next slide. Okay, so last set of slides is concluding with a related point. So far we've talked about what a crisis is and why they're so hard and how it's defined. And if this is sparking your interest and you say, oh, maybe I want to go into the field of crisis management, here's what that might look like. So what is crisis management as a field of study? Well, and this is my definition, that crisis management is a set of decisions made, actions taken to assess, to mitigate, to prepare for, to respond to recover from, and learn from crisis events. And I'm going to show you that visually right now in the next slide. So if you remember nothing else from our short time together today, the one thing I hope you remember about good crisis management is that good crisis management actually should begin a long, long time before the crisis occurs, and it only ends a long, long time after the crisis is over. So when I do training with leaders in crisis management or teach my class, really what we're doing is we're going through all the cycles in what's called the crisis management cycle. Some people call it the disaster management cycle. And you can see it's not just about response. So learning to be a leader during times of crisis starts really early with the first stage, which is at the top, assessing the risks. What should we be afraid of? When you walk out the door each day, what are the things you're most worried about bad happening to you? And how do we do that? How do we do that as a society? How do we do it in a way that's scientific and based on evidence? So the things that we tend to be afraid of aren't things that rarely happen. They're the things that really we should be most afraid of. And there's a whole science and field of study on risk assessment that shows how mixed up we get when we assess risks and how hard it is really to do good risk assessment. But learning how to do that is a critical task for leaders. Once you know what you're afraid of, you go to the next stage, which is for the things we're afraid of, because we can't keep all the bad things from happening. We can only have the resources and time to keep the things that are most likely to occur from happening. So the next stage of crisis management is you try to mitigate the threats we should be most afraid of. Mitigation means either keep them from happening, or if they did happen, lessen the risk of them of getting out of control. So we can look at what are the steps taken to try to make it less likely that a crisis will get out of control or make it impossible for the crisis to occur at all. We got on, Megan, Laura, and I did crisis mitigation before you all joined us today, because we knew that one of the biggest risks facing this session is technology won't work. So and sure enough, it didn't. I couldn't get my video on. Something went wrong, but we had a system in place to mitigate the impact of that, such that you never knew if I didn't tell you, because we had something we did early on. That's mitigation. The next stage is preparedness. So have we put all the capacity and resources in place to prepare for the bad thing so that when it happens, we can deploy those resources and act appropriately, and we have what we need? I hope you're thinking of COVID-19. Certainly in the US, the story of COVID-19 is an utter failure in preparedness in terms of hospitals and protective equipment. We didn't have it. We weren't prepared. So maybe going back, does that mean we didn't do good risk assessment or risk mitigation? An interesting question. The phase we're in now with COVID-19 is response. So we're in the response phase, which is who does what, how do we communicate, how do we do decision making, how do we deploy those resources, is it being done efficiently, how are we communicating with people during response. And then we're not out of COVID yet, but what we're looking forward to is the next and final two phases of crisis management. One is recovery, and the final stage is learning. So let me talk about recovery by looking, I only have a couple more slides, so the next slide. Keep clicking. Oh, sorry. Oh, here we are. Okay, so let me bring this back for COVID-19. So I hope what you're doing as I'm speaking is you're thinking of those categories in terms of COVID-19 and what I just went over. What is the degree of threat? How much time has we had to act? What's the type of uncertainty that your local officials or your national officials or healthcare folks, what is the amount of time and uncertainties they're facing? Was proper risk assessment done? How is COVID-19 being defined? How are we defining it as, is it a pandemic? Is it something minor under control? Different leaders are shaping and defining the crisis in different ways. What kind of mitigation has been done where you live? What kind of response, what does response look like? And then the recovery and learning, these last two phases. Now you can go to the next slide. I think about recovery in terms of how do you bring a system back to normal after the crisis is over? That's the recovery stage. What does normal means? It means that you and I and the other people impacted have a sense that they are now safe, that this bad thing can't happen again. And some of the work in crisis management makes this an interesting thing to look at. And this is the phase we're about to go into with COVID-19, because a sense that things are over and it's back to normal depend on two dimensions. The easy one is operational closure. All the fire trucks are put away, everyone who has responded has gone home, the hospitals are back to normal. But far more important and more difficult for leaders is what's called political closure. And that's a sense among the public that it's safe for me now. Operational closure can be over without political closure being over. So I ask you to think about, what are you going to need in your communities in order to have that closure, that political closure? Sometimes it's rituals, sometimes it's hearings. There's all sorts of things leaders have to do to bring about that sense of closure. And then my last slide is learning. So here's one of my favorite people, Albert Einstein, because he's got tons of great quotes. And his quote about learning is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And when we look at failed leadership in crisis, often it's because they didn't complete this final and hardest stage in good crisis management. Learn from mistakes so they can never happen again. And the research in the field says, well, what does it mean to learn? There's kind of three levels. First of all, cognitive shifts. That means belief. So learning means we believe something new. But the second stage is those beliefs then have to result in individual level behavioral changes. I believe something new enough that I'm going to change what I do. But the fourth stage, and this is the hard one for leaders, is what's called institutionalization. So that's making all of those individual level change built in to just the way that organizations and systems and societies work. If you can get through all of those three phases, you've done learning and you've completed your way around the crisis management cycle. So I think that's it. Next slide. So I'm happy to take questions or comments now, or if you want to go on, and we can take them at the end. Do you have a preference, Megan?
Sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute button there. I think we should maybe give attendees a few moments now, just in case there's some burning questions, or
Sure.
sometimes I know I take a little bit of time to formulate my questions. So if you're one of those types of processors, then feel free to save the question till later as well. But we'll give folks a little bit of time now, just in case.
Okay, and if you think of something later on and you want to put it in the chat function, feel free to do that and we can address it then too.
Exactly. Oh, looks like there might be one coming into the chat. Okay, here's a question. Oh, you got it. Okay.
Yeah, I got it. How does cognitive shift work? That's a great idea. And it's really hard because if you think of something that you believe in very strongly, what does it take to change the way you believe? And human beings have a hard time changing their cognitions, their belief systems, right? The child believes my mother loves me. And despite the fact that maybe that child is treated horribly by their mother or beaten at home, they continue to believe my mother loves me. Cognitions are so central to the way we see the world. So cognitive shifts, and this is where crises can be helpful, in the sense that during normal times, if we're not facing big threats to what we do, we're not shaken up, it's really hard to change belief systems. And if you think of that in terms of government, even scaling it up to how governments view their obligations and view the problems facing the world, the one thing about a crisis is they help precipitate big changes in what we believe, right? So I'll give you my most hope for cognitive shift in terms of COVID-19 is that we are used to thinking of enemies as being other people out there. The US, our enemy is China, our enemy is the Russia, or it's terrorism, Islamic terrorists, or what we think of enemies as being out there. So we have this huge national defense industry and we weaponize. One of the potential cognitive shifts of COVID-19 to me is that we're seeing in real terms that the enemy isn't other people, that we're all affected. And maybe this will slowly bring about a cognitive shift, a shift in beliefs among human beings that we need to stop treating each other as the enemy and we need to start seeing common challenges, climate change, pandemics, wildfires, earthquakes, all of these global issues. So how does it come about? Unfortunately, it comes about because you have to be really shaken up. And this COVID-19, I think that's the big test we're all going through. Are we shaken up enough now that we're going to change our beliefs about how we treat each other and see public health? And will that result in a change of behavior? For example, I'll shut up in a second, but now my mind is just going, whoo. So I heard a doctor say he hopes that COVID-19 will end handshaking across the world, because handshaking, doctors have always said, is the way that germs are passed from people to people. We know cognitively that handshaking is risky in terms of germs. Here's my germ. Nice to meet you. Oh, you can have my germ. I'll take your germ. A behavioral shift would be that's enough to make us then say, I'm going to stop shaking hands. The last stage, when I talked about institutionalization, that would mean socially, kind of conventionally, the norms of societies as in a mass way, we shift. Maybe we do what Japanese do, and instead of greeting people with a handshake after COVID-19, we're going to greet people with a bow. Who knows? But it's a tough road, and that's why the learning stage is so hard. Yeah, which organizations would employ a person who studied crisis management? Okay, lots. So crisis management is a skill set, almost like another skill I teach at SIT is monitoring and evaluation. So part of the answer to that question is if you go into an interview and you want to take a lead role in an organization, whether it's a nonprofit or government, and you say, oh, I know how to do monitoring and evaluation. They say, oh, this person has a good skill set. Similarly, in crisis management, it's often seen as a really good skill set. So if you're interviewing for a job and you say, oh, I've studied crisis management, it's a skill set that's attractive to employers. And that's why crisis management, we don't have a degree in crisis management, but in the degree in diplomacy and international relations that I run, and in my peace and justice leadership that I run, this is a subfield that we study. But there are specific organizations that do hire crisis management people. So in the United States, we have the Federal Emergency Management Agency. That's crisis management. We have the Department of Homeland Security. That's crisis management. Every state has a Department of Health that have crisis managers in them. They have an infrastructure group that does crisis management. One of my graduate students who graduated last year is now working in Provincetown, Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and he is the local crisis manager for the town. So increasingly towns are now seeing that we need to know how to do good crisis management. So whether it's a corporation that's trying to mitigate risk, whether it's government at the local, regional or national level, or the international level. What's the World Health Organization? It's a crisis management organization. The refugee organizations, both NGOs and intergovernmental organizations, it's crisis management. So there's a huge number of possible jobs in this field now.
We'll give attendees maybe just one more minute in case you want to type any more questions in. Otherwise, we can save them for the end as well.
Okay, I think we're good. So if you want to ask more questions, feel free to type them in, but I'll turn it back over to you, Megan.
Perfect. All right. Well, we're going to just take a moment to just take a stretch. I know some of us maybe have been sitting for a little bit before this during different sessions, or it's getting towards the end of the day here in the US and towards the end of the day over in Europe and in other countries as well. So yeah, take a moment, just take a stretch. We'll just take a couple minutes here, and if you need to grab a glass of water or just get refreshed. I know I'm going to talk for about 20 to 25 minutes here. So I just want to make sure everyone's alert and ready. And if you need to just take a quick moment to get back into the mindset of listening, I know it can get kind of, there's Zoom fatigue or just this exhaustion that can happen when you're staring at a screen for so many hours. So yeah, just take a moment if you want, and I'll jump in just about 30 seconds here. All right, looks like we'll just try and see if I can see everyone's videos here. Looks like most are off. Like most are back. It looks like just Mirtha looks like she may just, oh, coming back now. Perfect. There we go. All right. Well, these next few slides are going to be diving into a bit more on the programs that we offer at SIT and the scholarships and admissions process. So in case Bruce really got you thinking about crisis management and leadership, potentially down the road in the next couple of years, you might be interested in applying and looking into our programs. I just wanted to give you guys some information on those. But before we dive in, I just have this question that you can feel free to just kind of think about during the next 20 to 25 minutes, or if you have a social justice issue that you're extremely passionate about that you want to let me know and let the rest of us know, then feel free to mention it here or put it in the chat. But like I mentioned in the beginning, SIT kind of at the core and one of the pillars of our institution is social justice. So I just was curious, and something I want many of you to think about on the call is what is a social justice issue that really ignites a fire in you and really gets you excited and passionate about wanting to address that issue or that critical global issue, since oftentimes social justice issues span our world and our globe, not just within our own communities. So take a moment to just think through that a little bit here, and if you want to say something, feel free to jump in. I'll just say, for me, access to education is one of the biggest kind of social justice issues that I'm really passionate about. Similar to Laura, I studied international education at SIT, and a lot of the different research areas and papers that I wrote were on access to education. Primarily for me, it was in Thailand was the context that I looked at quite a bit. But overall, just the overarching theme for me is access to education. Great. We'll just think about those while we go through these next slides. So at SAT, we take a critical global issues framework when looking to develop and assess our programs at the Graduate Institute, as well as our study abroad programs. So these 7 different critical global issues are really what drive our program development, and we have programs that fall under each of these categories. So for me, when I was thinking about access to education, it fell under that education and social change critical global issue framework. With the crisis management and peace and justice leadership, those can fall under, crisis management can fall under many of them, I guess, and that's kind of the case that we see at SIT, is many of our programs fall under multiple critical global issues, because in reality, oftentimes all of these are interdependent, and there's a climate and environment issue, most likely that it also is affecting our global health and well-being. So they're so interconnected, and they're really tied to one another as well. So these themes will be mentioned a little bit throughout the next few slides, but I just wanted to put this up here in the beginning so you can kind of have an idea of what social justice issues and what kind of global issues we're looking at SIT, and what types of programs fall under these categories. I'll start with our study abroad programs. So at SIT, we offer just over 50 different study abroad programs that range from semester study abroad, so both the fall and spring semesters, summer study abroad opportunities, and we also have some students that study for the entire year with us at SIT, who would be doing both a fall and a spring semester. We have programs in just about 80 different countries. These are just a few examples that we have. So as I mentioned earlier, the critical global issues lens, as you can see, many of these are falling under various different social justice areas, from global health to climate and the environment, global security, peace and justice. There are education for social change. I mean, there's quite a few that these are falling under. But really what's important about SIT's programming is that they are very interdisciplinary, as I mentioned. So all of our programs are really taking an approach that realizes that a global health issue is more than just a global health issue. There's so much more that goes into it, from the human rights angle, from the environment angle, from the political angle, the economical angle. There's so much, there's so many different lenses that you need to look at when looking at a global issue, like the various ones that we use to drive our programming. And the topic that you study is going to be tied to the cultural and the geographical context. So you're not just going to go to Kenya because you've always wanted to go to Kenya, but the reason you're going to Kenya is because you want to study topics like urbanization and health and human rights. That is so vital and so alive in the Kenyan context. So we're not just going to have students going to these countries because it's the hot place to be and the best place to be this time of year, or the year of 2020 is the time to go to the Netherlands. I mean, perhaps, but that's not why we want our students to go on our programs. That's really, it's important because in those countries, there's such a cultural and topical reason why our students are doing the types of programs that we offer. And so within each of our study abroad programs at the undergraduate level, you will have the last about 6 or 7 weeks is an independent study project where you're really going to be working on creating some of your own unique research and really having this undergraduate research opportunity. That could be seen while if you're potentially working at an internship location, or you're going to be working in the field and really developing your own research and developing your own data set that you can analyze and write your own research paper and really have this capstone and final project that you can really feel excited about and proud of, and really something that perhaps down the road when you go to graduate school or when you go and land your first job, you can really use that experience and use those theories that you learned about and the different data sets that you perhaps had developed and researched and found to help you learn about something and really take that information to the next job or to your graduate studies. And it's something that really is a key part of our study abroad programs, is that final 6-7 weeks of research, because it really is making sure that students are really getting that pre-professional opportunity to really get the experience of doing research and original research. Like I mentioned, they do fall during the semester, the summer, and then we do have some short-term programs as well that fall a little bit shorter than the 6-week summer programs. We also have a program that's called the International Honors Program, or IHP, and this is a program where you'll be doing a comparative approach to a topic. So you may be studying climate change and going to 3 or 4 different countries to really take a look at climate change from different countries' perspectives. So really getting this understanding of what a critical global issue looks like from the lens of different countries. What's happening in Vietnam may be very different than what's happening in Chile or what's happening in Iceland. So really having this opportunity to see what climate change looks like, or seeing what global health looks like in different countries' contexts. And so what I have mentioned before, and I'll be getting into it more in the next few slides, is this concept of experiential learning. It's something that is similar to social justice. It's a pillar of the way we approach education and approach learning in our classrooms and out of the classroom. And so I just want to take a moment to just see if anyone on the call wants to take a stab at what experiential learning means, maybe how you would define experiential learning. And then I can run you through kind of what at SIT, how we approach experiential learning. So if anyone is brave on the call and wants to take a stab at what you think that is, go ahead.
And for all of our alumni on this call, like if you're not quite sure, this is how we approached the program at camp. So if you want to think about your camp experience and try to think about what that might mean, that's a little hint that might help. I could always say something, Megan, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing. I mean, just another hint is kind of as the word experiential, the word experience, you can kind of see that word in there. So when we think about learning, we're kind of thinking about learning by doing, right? So you learn by doing. So you learn by doing an activity. You learn by taking what you've done or learned in the classroom and applying that knowledge in a real context. So kind of, I guess for Laura, if you want to jump in and kind of give me your example, and then I can jump in after that.
Sure, yeah, I can give an example. So Camp Rising Sun, as all you alumni know, we focus on leadership. And instead of having you all sit in the classroom and us telling you about leadership, we put you all in leadership roles. So every alumni on this call has either been a leader of the day, leader of a project, leader of the vigil. So that's an example for experiential learning at camp.
Great, yeah, and at SIT, I guess I'll just kind of jump into how we, on the study abroad side, all of our programs do have kind of field study or kind of study tour opportunities where you're gonna be, no matter what class you're taking or what program you're enrolled in, you're not just gonna be sitting in the classroom learning about leadership, like Laura said, or learning about theories of leadership or theories of education or theories of student development theories. And there's so many different topics that we study, but you're not just going to be learning that in a classroom in Iceland. We're not going to have you go to Iceland and learn about climate change and just sit in a classroom as if you're in the US or as if you're in Hungary or if you're in Kenya. I mean, the reason you're in those countries is because there's a cultural, there's a geographical, there's a topical reason, and there's no sense in going to all these different countries to study climate change if you're just going to sit there in the classroom. Instead, we want you to be able to go into the field and see the impacts of climate change or see the impacts of a public health crisis, or seeing what leadership looks like on the ground in Madagascar. I mean, these are the opportunities to really see it happening in front of you and watching it unfold and having the chance to, yes, have some classroom learning and really do learn about these different theories or these different concepts, but then have the chance to go see those in action and then reflect on those and really understand, okay, so in Iceland, this is the way that they're approaching climate change, and this is the way they're approaching different afforestation or reforestation efforts to really combat rising sea levels or soil changes in the fields in Iceland. And so really understanding why are they doing that and approaching it from a critical lens of asking yourself, is that the best way? And what is happening in my own country? And how can we better understand the best approach to tackling these critical global issues? And so after you've had the chance to learn about it, you have the experience of seeing it, you reflect, you then have the chance to come back to your own home country and really challenge the ideas, or perhaps take some of those ideas that you learned about and apply them in the next situation when you find yourself being able to apply that knowledge. So experiential learning, it's cyclical, it's a cycle, right? So it's going to be constantly happening all the time. You're going to always have the chance to really take that knowledge and take those new theories and new areas of learning and apply them and see it happening right in front of you. So at SIT, that's how we approach it. We really think it's something that happens all the time. Learning is happening every day, no matter if you're in a classroom or not. We're all learners. We're all lifelong learners. And so we hope that that's something that you find interesting and something that you would really want in your educational experience. So if anyone wants to add an idea or add a thought to that, I'll give you 10 seconds or so to jump in. Otherwise, we can talk about it at the end as well. Okay, we'll move on. All right, so SIT Graduate Institute. So this is our graduate programs at SIT. So as Laura mentioned, she is a graduate of SIT Graduate Institute's International Education Program. I'm an alumna of the International Education Program as well, and Bruce teaches at the Graduate Institute. And so all of our programs do have this intercultural component to all of our programs. So no matter if it's a international education program that kind of has the intercultural international name in its title, or a program like our development practice program, you know, although the title may not imply that it's an international or intercultural focus, it has an intercultural focus just because it is an international topic. Development and development practice is something that's happening across the globe. So our program formats, there's two different program formats that we have. We have a full-time global program, which is a one-year intensive comparative program that takes place in 2 or 3 different countries around the world. And so it really is kind of getting at that IHP model that I mentioned in the study abroad framework. And so it's really having the chance to learn about a topic in 2 or 3 different countries. So using one of Bruce's programs as an example, the Diplomacy and International Relations program, it starts with a seminar in the US in Washington, DC. It then takes students to Switzerland to kind of get a different European context of diplomacy and international relations, then followed by a semester in South Africa, kind of getting that South-South relations to diplomacy and diplomatic relations. And then the last semester of those programs, you have the chance to choose where you want to do your capstone and your practicum. And so that could happen back in your home country where you're living currently. It could be in a country where you've always wanted to get experience and perhaps have your career there, and really getting your foot in the door and kind of grounding yourself and having the chance to take off in a new country. But it's really, you have the autonomy to pick that last location. So really adding another lens and adding another perspective to the topic that you're studying. So that's the full-time global program. Those are 12 or 16 months, depending on the program. We have one that is a little bit longer, but most are all 12 months. The second format that we offer is a part-time low residency model. And this one, it's a 2-year program that has a mix of face-to-face and online programming. So the program starts face-to-face, where you're going to be in Vermont, where our campus is based. Having the chance to build that cohort, understand who your classmates are, understand their leadership styles, their learning styles, get to know your faculty and the staff at SIT, and really taking a couple courses that really build and develop that foundation of your program. And then from there, you'll then transition to the online phase where you're going to be living wherever you choose to live throughout the course of the program. And you'll continue working full time and really having that chance to have that experiential learning approach where you're going to be learning about topics online in your classes and then going to work the next day and perhaps seeing it unfold right in front of you, learning about a crisis management approach or leadership styles, and then going into work and thinking, oh yeah, you're right, my boss does fit that one type of leadership style I just learned about. So really having that chance to connect the theory to practice in the low residency model. There's one more required residency for those part-time low residency programs. Some may take place in Vermont the second year. Some may take place abroad. So with the Peace and Justice Leadership Program that Bruce also leads, the second residency takes place in South Africa. So having the chance to see peace and justice leadership and learning about that in the South African context. And so with SIT, once you're a graduate of the Graduate Institute, you really do, you not only graduate with a diploma and with the excitement of being a master's student, but you enter into one of the largest networks of international professionals around the globe. We have many of our students are coming from not just the US, but from countries all over the world. And even some of our students that perhaps were living in the US during the course of their degree end up finding work and end up wanting to work internationally. Just because our programs are so internationally and interculturally focused, many of our graduates do end up moving outside of the US or outside of the home country where they were studying originally to really get that international component and understanding. So that's huge. So if you are a graduate and you want to perhaps move across the world to start your career, there most likely is going to be at least 1 or 2 people there that know about SIT and can really make those connections to help you get off the ground and really help that transition into the next phase of your life. And then those are just some careers that some of our graduates go into. It's a very small list. The list could go on and on and on for many, many slides, but those are just some examples. And then here's a list of our graduate programs that we currently offer. So on the left will be all of the part-time low residency programs. So those are 2 years. And then on the right, you'll see our full-time global programs. So I'll just have you guys have a moment just to read through those. And so Bruce leads the Masters of Arts in Diplomacy and International Relations, as well as the Masters of Arts in Peace and Justice Leadership. So those are some of the current programs. Okay, so this is another question, and in case some of you want to get chatty now, this might be a chance to talk a little bit about international education. So international education, it is a degree that we offer. It is a degree that you can choose to enroll in, but it also is kind of the overarching idea of our programs and our models. You don't have to be studying international education to really be a part of international education. Camp Rising Sun is an example of international education. It's an opportunity to study with, or maybe not study, but learn about leadership and learn about all these different ways to be a leader with students and with your peers who are coming from other countries. It's a chance to really have this opportunity to learn from each other, learn about each other's cultures, learn about the different ways that you approach leadership, approach education. What's the education system like in Hungary compared to Madagascar? What's the education system like in the US? Being in the US, being in upstate New York for this camp, how is that different and perhaps similar in some ways to the type of lifestyle and the type of education system that you're currently living in right now and enrolling in right now? And for me, international education, it's beyond important. I mean, I'm a little bit biased being that I work in this field and it's something that I'm so passionate about, but I think it really is at the core of what makes our world a better place. We need to have international exchange to make sure that we are combating some of the biggest critical global issues, and we need to be able to work with each other and collaborate across borders in order to develop the best approach to tackling not just COVID-19, but any other crisis that's out there. I mean, without working with each other and working across cultures and working across borders and working across the international field, we're not going to be able to come up with the best solution. There's not just a one country has the best way of going about it. And so we need to learn from each other. And for me, that's why it's important. We can't tackle critical global issues. We can't tackle crises without working across borders. So I'll stop talking for a moment here and see if anyone else wants to dive in to answer this kind of lofty and very big question. And perhaps it's something you just want to think about instead of answering.
Maybe I can say a few words regarding this. It's a bit different for me because I do not want to study abroad because I want to get into like international, communication or diplomacy, but because I want to work abroad as a doctor. So that's what's the really interesting and important part for me. And this is that maybe the global health issues and studying that one, that's the most interesting for me. And that's why I think it would be even better to learn it in the US or in the United Kingdom, and the mother tongue is English, because if I want to work abroad in this field, then it's easier that language and I don't have to translate it to a different language after I learned it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think it's really important to give the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I haven't touched on too much is language acquisition, and this language learning is something that's such a key component of international education. Having the opportunity to learn a new language or practice a language that you have been already learning in the home country, in the native tongue and the native language of those countries is huge. So that's, yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. All right, in the interest of time, I'm just going to move ahead. There's just a couple more slides to go through here. So for the study abroad programs, I just wanted to briefly just show you what's the requirements. It's a pretty straightforward process. So if anyone on the call is interested in applying for our study abroad programs, usually you can do the application, get it finished in just an afternoon. So it shouldn't be too exhausting to try and get it put together, but some programs do have some additional essays or additional documents that you may need to submit, but yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process for undergrad, and similarly for grad as well. For grad, we do require that you have your bachelor's degree prior to pursuing your master's degree. We look for professional intercultural experience. So the fact that you've done Camp Rising Sun, that is an intercultural experience right there. So that's a huge experience that you can put on your resume, and really, beyond graduate school admissions, I think that just Camp Rising Sun in general, I hope that you all are really highlighting that, no matter whether it's in an educational context or in a potential job context or just within your own community to be a leader. I think it's something really important that you should be highlighting. So I hope you guys are all doing that already. And ability to use experience as a source of learning. So again, that experiential learning approach. So we really hope that our students at the Graduate Institute really do prioritize and think that experiential learning is important. And the GRE is not required for the Graduate Institute at SIT. So that's something that I always like to put on here, just because sometimes standardized exams does get, I was always very anxious with test taking. So that was something that I found really exciting when I found out about SIT. So we do not require that. Okay, now,
Hey,
sorry.
Megan, really quickly, just to explain, so the GRE is an exam that is typically needed prior to applying for a graduate school. So if you aren't familiar with what that is, SIT Graduate Institute is a program where they do not require this standardized test for admission. So I personally think that that's also a great thing, because standardized testing does not denote your knowledge and all the things you know.
Exactly, yeah. So we take more of a narrative approach. We really want to understand who you are as a person versus some number on a paper that most likely won't equate to who you are as a student. All right, so we are just about at the end, and this might be the main thing you came for, learning about what are the financial benefits of being an alum of Camp Rising Sun. So as Laura mentioned on the beginning of the call, this is a new partnership that we have recently formed, and it really is an opportunity to provide scholarships for those of you that are alums of Camp Rising Sun, knowing that you have gained so much in terms of leadership style and leadership skills, I should say, and this commitment to intercultural learning and intercultural exchange. We really think that alums of Camp Rising Sun are going to be some of the best and greatest potential applicants for our program. So we really want to highlight that and recognize that commitment that you have to experiential and international exchange and education. And so on the screen here, you can see these are the few scholarships that we offer. So who is eligible? If you have been a summer staff member at Camp Rising Sun or a participant, you are eligible for these following scholarships. So each year we will be offering one $2,000 scholarship towards a semester program, one $1,000 scholarship towards summer programs. So those would be for study abroad. And the price of a semester in a summer program really does vary. So that's why I didn't get into the tuition too much during this presentation, because it really can vary quite a bit from program to program, depending on the country and the different topic that's being studied. But in general, they can range anywhere from about 15,000 for a semester, and they can be upwards of 20,000. So really depending on the program again, but $2,000 off a semester program and $1,000 off the summer program. And then at the Graduate Institute, we'll be offering one 20% scholarship towards tuition. And so that 20% could be just about a little under $10,000 off of a graduate degree, which we hope is an exciting amount to be able to offer you that discount. And then in addition to the competitive 20% scholarship, we also will be offering two $5,000 scholarships in addition to that. So if there's a lot of interest for SIT Graduate Institute, we want to make sure we have a few options available for those, and really hoping that we can provide scholarships to those that are interested. And how to apply in the application for either SIT Study Abroad or SIT Graduate Institute, there will be a space where you can, there'll be a drop-down menu that'll ask if you are an alumni of any of the following programs. And in that drop-down, you'll find Camp Rising Sun. And then also, if you want to email Laura and just let her know that that you've applied, then Laura can let me know, and I can keep an eye out for those applications and make sure our admissions staff is aware that an application is coming through. Great. So that looks like we're just about right on time. So these are our contact, our emails, I should say, and our names and our titles there. So again, this is a chance to ask some questions about either Bruce's presentation, the information I just shared about our graduate and study abroad programs, or if you just have any burning questions or jokes that you'd like to share, you can feel free to add them here. So I will mute myself now since I have a tendency to talk quite a bit, and I will open it up to anyone else on the call.
Wonderful. I would love to just give some more information coming from my personal perspective, and like maybe connecting it a bit to Camp Rising Sun as well. So myself, just being a graduate of SIT, as we've talked about, what really stood out to me about SIT is this focus on experiential learning that Megan talked about before. So while you all were at our program, we didn't specifically say this entire program is based on experiential learning, but that's what it was. So if you found yourself connecting to the model and approach that we took that was very based in, oh, let's have an experience, then let's talk about it, and not just sitting down and being talked to, then I would highly encourage you to take a look at SIT, because that's what this program is also based in. It's another institution that also encourages you to speak your mind and focuses on discussion and reflection, something else that we do a lot of at Camp Rising Sun. And I'll mention as well that in addition to this scholarship, as alumni of Camp Rising Sun, there is a good amount of other financial aid and scholarships that are available, which you can find on their website. So graduate school is expensive, but in addition to this scholarship, there's other financial aid and scholarships available as well. And quick notes on SAT Study Abroad as well. They provide programs that, again, Megan spoke very well about it as well, but in my experience working for other institutions in the field, something else I really want to highlight about SAT Study Abroad is they really do attempt to and succeed in having you engage with local communities and have that meaningful cultural connection that is another huge tenet of our Camp Rising Sun program. So Laura approved on both of them. So yeah, before I give my thanks and final goodbye, I think we have some time if people have questions for Bruce or any questions for Megan related to these programs or tips for applying. If anything comes to your mind, now is your time. You can either speak your questions, or if you feel more comfortable, you can add them into the chat.
Just one question popped to my mind that I just mentioned that my goal is to be a doctor. And regarding that, I want to ask if you recommend to do the healthcare crisis management program, or it's like unnecessary and you don't recommend it, or why is it useful? Why is it a useful skill if I'm going to be a doctor?
Well, it would depend on what kind of doctor you wanted to be. I think you mentioned you're interested in practicing internationally.
Yep.
Yeah. So a lot of doctors work in severe crisis contexts in which having an understanding of decision making and management outside of just the individual patient might be important. And a lot of doctors end up being part doctors, part administrators too. So many doctors need to understand systems and processes and also put things in place to deal with crises from getting under control and being able to communicate effectively. So, I think if you're interested in working, say, in a refugee type of situation or work for Doctors Without Borders, certainly some kind of crisis training, you're not likely to get. In fact, I'm sure you're not going to get it in medical school. So it might be the kind of thing you think about doing a certificate in to help augment that training. A lot of it'll be learning as you do, but any training you get beforehand will just help.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Something else that I'll mention as well is a lot of the SIT study abroad programs do have a focus on like global health and health systems. So especially if you're interested in being a doctor abroad, if you wanted to study abroad, this could be an opportunity. God, I feel like I work for SIT study abroad right now again. Like, I want you all to love the programs as much as I know you will love them. Are there any, oh, it looks like we have a question in the chat. So Mirtha says you can apply for the program only if you have already finished a bachelor.
That would be for our graduate programs, but for our undergraduate programs, you do not have to be, you can be matriculating or currently pursuing your bachelor's. So you don't have to be a graduate for the undergraduate programs. For the study abroad, it's actually a requirement that you are a current undergraduate student pursuing your bachelor's. Great question.
Right, well, maybe give it another 30 seconds to get those final questions out.
And if any questions do come up, you can always email myself about program questions, or Bruce if you have any crisis related or really anything. Bruce can always answer a lot of things as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that at this point, we will say goodbye, but I want to give a huge thank you to Bruce for walking us through a very interesting and thought-provoking mini session on leadership during times of conflict. I myself benefited from that, and it brought me back to my education at SIT. So thank you. And I myself relate to also being able to perform better under pressure. So thank you for helping me understand why a little bit more. I also want to give a huge thank you to Megan for being with us today and informing our alumni on these 2 incredible opportunities. So huge thanks to you, Megan, and our work leading up to this. And I highly, again, encourage our alumni to apply for these programs. So do it. And if you have any questions that might come up later, again, you can see the emails that we have listed here, or you can also email me and I can connect you with them. Next week, we'll be sending out a link to all participants, including all of you, to our website where we will have the recorded session for you to be able to gain it from it. So thank you everyone for joining. If you want to unmute yourself and say thank you to our guests for being here, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much for sharing your information and teaching
Our
us
pleasure.
a bit more.
You're very welcome.
Wonderful. All right, everybody. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you, Megan and Bruce, for being here. And yeah, join us for, we have another scholarship opportunity tomorrow for the Georgie Jonas Scholarship, also available to all alumni. So we hope that you join us there as well. All right, bye, everybody.